The colonel decided to kick her in front of 500 soldiers. It was a mistake that would end his career, a miscalculation of such epic proportions that it would become a cautionary tale whispered in mess halls for years to come. He saw a logistics captain, small and unassuming. He failed to see the weapon she had become. The moment before his legs snapped was the last moment he ever felt in command. 1. Arrival. The transport's ramp lowered with a hydraulic groan, spitting a gust of superheated air and sand into the waiting faces on the tarmac. Firebase Obsidian baked under a relentless sun, a collection of prefabricated structures and HESCO barriers that looked less like a military installation and more like a scar on the face of the desert. To Captain Alara Vance, it smelled of dust, diesel, and simmering tension. She descended the ramp with a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her movements were economical, each step placed with an unconscious precision that belied her assignment. Her uniform was clean, her boots immaculate, her posture ramrod straight. The soldiers loitering nearby, their own uniforms stained with sweat and grime, took one look at her and dismissed her. She was a REMF, a rear echelon motherfucker, sent from some air-conditioned command center to count bullets and file reports. The whispers started immediately, quiet and contemptuous. Logistics desk jockey. Probably got lost on her way to the PX. Alara heard them. She always heard everything. But she gave no sign. Her focus was on the environment, her mind cataloging data with the speed of a combat computer. She saw a loose guardrail on a sentry tower, a potential failure point in a firefight. She noted a frayed power cable running from a generator, a fire hazard waiting for a spark. The wind, she registered, was coming steadily from the southwest, which would affect mortar trajectories and carry the sound of an approaching ground vehicle for miles, if one knew how to listen. She was assigned a bunk in a shared female barracks, a cramped space that smelled of stale air and cleaning solvent. The other occupants, a pair of weary-looking comm specialists, gave her curt nods and went back to their tablets. Alara didn't try to make small talk. She unpacked with methodical silence. There were no pictures, no letters, no personal trinkets. Just neatly folded uniforms, a standard-issue toiletry kit, and a compact datapad. Her weapon, a standard M4, was stripped, cleaned, and reassembled in under 90 seconds, the oiled clicks of the bolts sliding home, the only sound she made. Tucked away in a hidden pocket of her bag, wrapped in a small square of oilcloth, was the only thing that belonged to her past, a single, heavy challenge coin. Its surface was worn smooth from years of handling, the insignia on its face nearly erased. She never looked at it in front of others. It was a ghost, a reminder of a life she was supposed to have left behind. She set up her bunk, ensuring everything was perfectly aligned, then stood for a moment, listening to the hum of the base. It was a discordant symphony of generators, distant shouts, and the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel. To everyone else, it was just noise. To Alara, it was a baseline she would monitor for any deviation, any single note out of place that signaled a threat. She was a logistician. Her paper said so, but her soul was an early warning system. 2. Dismissal. The mess hall at Firebase Obsidian was a microcosm of the base itself, loud, functional, and simmering with an undercurrent of exhaustion. The air was thick with the smell of scorched coffee and whatever protein paste was being served that day. It was here, during her third day on base, that Captain Vance had her first direct encounter with the source of its rigid, overbearing command climate, Colonel Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man built to fill a room, tall and broad-shouldered, with a chest full of medals and a voice that had been cultivated to carry across a parade ground without a microphone. He moved through the world as if he owned it. He spotted Alara sitting alone at a small table, nursing a cup of black coffee, her datapad open in front of her. He strode over, his XO and a gaggle of junior officers trailing in his wake like pilot fish. He stopped directly in front of her table, casting a long shadow over her. The cacophony of the mess hall quieted as soldiers sensed the impending confrontation. "Captain Vance," he boomed, not as a greeting, but as an accusation. Alara looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. Colonel, I've been reviewing your file, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Records say you're a logistics specialist. Quartermaster Corps, he gestured vaguely around the gritty, forward operating base. This is the tip of the spear, Captain. We don't have much use for paper pushers and inventory clerks out here. We need fighters. His eyes scanned her slight frame, her clean uniform, and he smirked. It was an ugly, dismissive expression. Tell me, what exactly does High Command think a logistician is going to do for us that my NCOs aren't already doing better? The insult was clear, aimed not just at her, but the entire support structure he deemed inferior. Alara took a slow sip of her coffee before answering, the deliberate act a small pocket of defiance in the face of his bluster. I go where I'm assigned, Colonel, she said, her voice even and calm, carrying no more volume than necessary. It held no anger, no defensiveness. It was a simple statement of fact. Her placid response seemed to infuriate him more than any argument would have. He saw it as weakness, as confirmation of his prejudice. See that you stay out of the way, ma'am, he spat, loading the honorific with as much disrespect as he could muster. Stick to your containers and your manifests. Let the real soldiers handle the war. He turned on his heel and stalked away, his entourage scrambling to keep up. He made a loud comment to his XO about standards slipping and the brass sending them useless baggage. Laughter, forced and sycophantic, followed him. The mess hall slowly returned to its previous volume, but dozens of eyes remained on Alara. She had been publicly dressed down, marked as an outsider by the base commander himself. She showed no reaction. She simply turned her attention back to the datapad, took another sip of coffee, and continued her work as if Colonel Thorne never existed. But she filed the encounter away, another piece of data in her growing tactical assessment of Firebase Obsidian. The commander was arrogant, insecure, and valued brute force over intellect. A dangerous combination. 3. Observation. For the next week, Captain Vance performed her duties in the logistics depot with quiet, unnerving efficiency. She reorganized the chaotic supply sheds, creating a system so intuitive that even the greenest private could find a replacement firing pin in under a minute. Her manifests were flawless, her supply requests prescient. She did the job of a logistician perfectly, and in doing so, became functionally invisible to the base's command structure. They saw the results, smoother operations, fewer shortages, but they didn't see her. And that was exactly what she wanted. While her hands were busy with inventory, her mind was engaged in a far more critical task: observation. She was building a complete operational picture of the base, not from the reports and maps in the command center, but from the ground up. Each morning before sunrise, she would walk the full perimeter. She didn't jog for exercise. She moved at a steady, deliberate pace, her eyes scanning every inch of the wire, every shadow, every approach angle. She noted the blind spots from the guard towers, places where the overlapping fields of fire were thin. She saw how the guards in Tower 4 grew complacent around 0300, their attention drifting. She identified a wadi, a dry riverbed, that offered a covered approach to within 50 meters of the western wall, a feature not adequately marked on any of the tactical maps. During the day, she would watch the training exercises in the designated CQB range. From her vantage point near the supply depot, she could see it all. Colonel Thorne prized aggressive, high-speed drills. The soldiers were loud, fast, and brutal, but they were also sloppy. Alara saw it instantly. Their footwork was clumsy, they flagged each other with their muzzles when stacking up for a breach, and their reload times under simulated pressure were dangerously slow. They were training for a Hollywood action sequence, not a real firefight where fractions of a second meant the difference between life and death. Her most valuable time was spent in the comms tent, ostensibly to cross-reference signal equipment inventories. While there, she listened. The radio operators were competent but overwhelmed, filtering through a constant stream of chatter and atmospheric noise. They dismissed a faint, rhythmic pulse of static on a low-band frequency as simple interference from a nearby, geological formation. Alara heard something else. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. Faint, almost imperceptible, but structured. It was the whisper of a signal piggybacking on the natural noise of the desert. She learned the people, too. She saw how Private Jenkins, a young intelligence analyst, was sharp and observant, but too intimidated by the colonel's bluster to voice his concerns. She noted that Sergeant Miller, the head of the motor pool, was a brilliant mechanic but stretched thin, working 18-hour days to keep the unit's aging vehicles operational. She was mapping the base's strengths and, more importantly, its vulnerabilities. Colonel Thorne saw soldiers and equipment. Alara Vance saw a complex system, and she was identifying every potential point of failure. 4. Pressure. The pressure arrived on the wind. It started as a hazy brown line on the horizon, a smudge against the pale blue sky. Within an hour, it was a towering wall of sand, a monstrous, churning beast of grit and dust that was about to swallow Firebase Obsidian whole. Sandstorms were common, but the veterans on base exchanged uneasy glances. This one felt different. It moved with a malevolent speed, and the sky turned a sickly orange. By the time the storm hit, visibility had dropped to less than 5 feet. The wind howled like a banshee, ripping at antennas and tearing at sandbags. The fine, talcum-like dust infiltrated everything, clogging air filters, stinging eyes, and coating the back of every throat. The base hunkered down, a lonely island in a sea of violent chaos. Then the real problems began. First, the long-range communications went dead. It wasn't the usual static-filled drop-off caused by a storm. It was a sudden, chilling silence. One moment, there was a connection to headquarters, the next, nothing. Just before the blackout, the faint, rhythmic static Alara had been monitoring on the low-band frequency flared into an overwhelming roar of white noise, a powerful, targeted jamming signal. Then it too went silent. Seconds later, the perimeter sensors started screaming. Red lights flashed across the tactical displays in the command center, indicating multiple breaches. Alarms blared across the base, a frantic, useless noise against the shriek of the wind. Panic began to curdle the air in the command hub. Colonel Thorne stood in the center of the chaos, his face flushed, barking orders that were more reaction than strategy. Give me a sitrep from Tower 3. Where the hell is my comms link? I want a quick reaction force at Sector 7 now. Another one to Sector 2. Move, move, move. His voice was a force of nature, but it was a blunt instrument against a precise threat. Squads suited up and plunged into the blinding storm, tethered to each other by ropes, trying to respond to the sensor alerts. But they were moving blind. The alerts were coming from all directions at once, east, west, north, an impossible, simultaneous assault. The command center became a vortex of confusion. Operators shouted conflicting reports into their headsets, while runners slipped on the dusty floor, trying to deliver messages that were obsolete by the time they arrived. Thorne, stripped of his long-range eyes and ears, was reduced to a state of frustrated rage. His entire command philosophy was based on overwhelming force and aggressive action, but he didn't know where to direct it. He was swinging a sledgehammer in the dark, wasting energy and spreading his forces thin. The base, for all its firepower, was deaf, blind, and bleeding men into the storm on a wild goose chase. The carefully constructed illusion of control had shattered, and the raw, ugly face of fear was beginning to show on the faces of his men. Cinq interventions. Into this maelstrom of controlled chaos walked Captain Alara Vance. She moved through the frantic command center with a preternatural calm, a point of stillness in the swirling storm of panicked activity. She didn't run or shout. She simply appeared at the edge of the central tactical map table, her presence a silent rebuke to the surrounding hysteria. Colonel Thorne noticed her out of the corner of his eye. His face, already red with fury, darkened. Vance, what in the hell are you doing in my TOC? Get back to your supply sheds. This is no place for... He never finished the sentence. Alara ignored him completely. Her attention was locked on the large, digital map of the base, where dozens of red icons blinked erratically along the perimeter. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it possessed a quality of absolute certainty that cut through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "The breaches are faint," she stated, her tone flat and devoid of emotion. Thorne stared at her, momentarily stunned into silence by her audacity. The other officers paused their shouting to look. Alara's finger tapped a section of the map on the southern perimeter, an area showing no alerts, no activity. It depicted the entrance to an old, reinforced supply tunnel that had been sealed years ago. "They're using the storm for cover and the jamming to blind us," she explained, her voice never rising. "They're creating ghost signals all along the perimeter to draw our forces out, make us chase shadows in the storm." She traced a line on the map with her finger, originating from the direction of the strange signal she had been tracking for days. The jamming signal originated from a 0.5 clicks southwest. "It's a directional broadcast focused on our main comms array. They're not just blocking our signal, they're creating a corridor of silence." She looked up from a map, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the command staff before landing on Thorne. "They're not trying to go over the walls. They're coming up from underneath. The attack will be a single-point entry. Right here." Her finger pressed firmly on the icon for the sealed supply tunnel. "It's the only spot on the base that is structurally vulnerable from below and far enough away from the main generators that the seismic sensors wouldn't pick up the digging until it was too late." A tense silence fell over the command center, broken only by the howl of the wind outside. What she said was audacious, a theory built on a whisper of static and an intuitive leap. It ran counter to every piece of hard data their failing systems were giving them. Thorne's mind raced. His own strategy was failing miserably. His men were lost in the storm, the base was in chaos, and he had no viable alternative. To trust this logistics captain was an admission of his own failure. Not to trust her might mean losing the entire base. His pride warred with the cold logic of survival. For a second, it seemed he would explode with rage. Then, with a low growl of frustration, he grabbed a radio handset. "All QRF teams, disengage and fall back. I want a fire team at the south tunnel entrance. Now, double time. 6th shift." The fire team, cobbled together from the nearest available soldiers, moved cautiously toward the south perimeter. They fought through the blinding dust, their world reduced to the few feet of ground illuminated by their weapon lights. They found the sealed tunnel entrance, a heavy steel plate set into a concrete bunker, looking just as it had for years, quiet, inert, and forgotten. The team leader was about to radio in that it was a false alarm when the point man held up a fist. He motioned toward the ground. There, at the edge of the steel plate, a fine trickle of fresh dirt was being pushed up from underneath. They didn't have to wait long. A cutting torch flared to life on the other side of the plate, slicing through the thick steel with an angry hiss. The fire team took up positions, their hearts pounding in their chests. The moment a section of the plate fell away, revealing a dark, freshly dug tunnel, they opened fire. The firefight was short, brutal, and fought at point-blank range. The enemy infiltrators, elite specialists expecting to emerge into an undefended rear area, were caught completely by surprise. They were cut down in the narrow confines of their own tunnel, their meticulously planned assault shattered before it could even begin. Firebase Obsidian was saved from a catastrophic breach that would have certainly resulted in its capture. As the Sandstorm began to blow itself out and the comms flickered back to life, the story spread through the base like a current of electricity. It wasn't the Colonel's decisive leadership or the bravery of the QRF teams that was the talk of the barracks. It was the quiet logistics captain, the paper pusher, the one who had stood calmly in the heart of the chaos and seen the truth when everyone else was blind. Colonel Thorne said nothing to her. He didn't thank her, didn't acknowledge her. But the way he looked at her changed. The open contempt was gone, replaced by a guarded, resentful curiosity. He had been shown up, his authority questioned not by insubordination, but by sheer, undeniable competence. He watched her now, trying to understand how she could have known. Others were less reticent. That evening, as Alara was running a diagnostic on the depot's inventory system, Private Jenkins, the young analyst, approached her. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clutching a datapad to his chest. "Captain," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, thank you. How did you know?" The sensor data was absolute. It made no sense. Alara looked up from her screen, her expression as placid as ever. She considered the complex web of data points she had synthesized, the pattern of the jamming signal, the illogical spread of the ghost breaches, the tactical advantages of the tunnel, the psychological profile of an enemy that preferred precision over brute force. She boiled it all down to its simplest, most fundamental truth. "I listened," she said. Jenkins stared at her, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. She hadn't just heard the noise, she had listened to the silence and understood what it was trying to say. 7-second test. Weeks passed. A fragile, unspoken truce settled over Firebase Obsidian. Captain Vance was no longer a target of open scorn, but she was an anomaly, an uncomfortable presence that reminded Colonel Thorne of his own fallibility. He left her to her logistics, and she, in turn, remained a ghost within the machine of the base. But the incident had been noted by high command. Thorne was now under a microscope, and he knew it. He needed a win, a clean, successful operation to restore his reputation. The opportunity came in the form of a high-value asset, a captured enemy strategist, a man whose mind held the keys to the entire insurgency in the region, needed to be transported from the relative insecurity of Obsidian to a hardened black site for interrogation. The mission, codenamed Viper's Kiss, was critical, and the risk of an enemy rescue attempt was deemed almost certain. Thorne assembled the mission planning team in the main briefing room. It was a collection of his most trusted officers, men who thought as he did, and, to the surprise of everyone in the room, Captain Alara Vance. Thorne addressed the room, but his eyes were on her. "Captain Vance, since you have a unique perspective on enemy tactics, you will be assisting with the convoy's logistical plan." The implication was clear. You got lucky once. Let's see you handle supply chains. He was putting her in the room, but confining her to her official role, a subtle power play. The team laid out the primary and secondary routes on the holographic map. Both were standard military doctrine. The fastest, most direct paths, heavily armed and moving at speed. They were predictable. When it was her turn to speak, Alara walked to the map and wiped it clean with a single gesture. "Both these routes are death traps," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of protest. "They know we have him. They'll be waiting on every overpass and in every narrow valley." She began to draw a new route, a long, looping path that went in the opposite direction for the first 50 kilometers. It wound its way through a treacherous series of rocky canyons and dry riverbeds, terrain considered impassable for the convoy's heavy MRAPs. She laid out a schedule that was counterintuitive, with long halts in exposed positions during the day and high-speed movements at night, without lights. "They'll expect us to move fast, so we'll move slow. They'll expect us to hide at night, so we'll move in the dark," she explained. "We use their assumptions against them. The terrain is our defense. Any ambush force will be channeled into one of these 3 choke points, here, and here. Predictable. We'll have Overwatch teams in place hours before the convoy even leaves the wire." The other officers were aghast. "That's insane," one major exclaimed. "We'd be lucky not to lose a vehicle just to the terrain, let alone the enemy. It's too complex, too risky." Thorne listened, his face a granite mask. He remembered the tunnel. He remembered the calm certainty in her voice as his command center fell apart around him. He was being tested by his superiors, and now he would use her as his instrument. He looked directly at Alara, his voice cold and hard. "It's your plan, Captain." He stood up, his decision made. "You're leading the tactical security element. See that it works." It wasn't an assignment. It was a gauntlet thrown down. He was sending her out into the kill zone, placing the success of the mission and the lives of the soldiers squarely on her shoulders. If she succeeded, it was his victory. If she failed, it was her fault. It was the ultimate test. 8. Reveal. The convoy, 3 heavily armored MRAPs and 2 light escort vehicles, rolled out of Firebase Obsidian under the cover of a moonless night. They followed Vance's seemingly nonsensical route, crawling through the desert at a snail's pace. The silence on the command net was deafening. Hours into the mission, just as Thorne's officers back at the TOC were beginning to sweat, the trap was sprung. A massive IED detonated on the main highway, the route Vance had rejected, precisely where the convoy would have been. It was followed by a coordinated RPG and machine gun ambush. The enemy had pounced, but the cage was empty. Miles away, Vance's convoy continued its slow, steady progress, completely undetected. But the enemy was resourceful. A secondary force, a mobile unit held in reserve, was vectored to their position, alerted by a scout drone that stumbled upon the convoy's heat signatures. The attack came suddenly in a narrow, rock-strewn canyon. RPGs slammed into the lead vehicle, disabling it and blocking the path. Machine gun fire erupted from the canyon walls, pinning the soldiers down. In that moment, Captain Alara Vance, the logistician, ceased to exist. She moved with a speed and ferocity that was breathtaking. Before the first RPG had even impacted, she was out of her vehicle, issuing orders with a clipped, chilling authority. Gunnery, suppress ridgeline, 290. Team 2, pop smoke, establish a base of fire. Medic with me. Her voice, stripped of all warmth, was a weapon in itself. She wasn't just commanding, she was fighting. She moved through the kill zone with an impossible grace, her rifle speaking in short, controlled bursts. 2 tangos on the ridge went down. She vaulted over a rock, firing from the hip to suppress a machine gun nest while dragging a wounded soldier to cover. She moved like a phantom, anticipating enemy fire, exploiting angles, turning their ambush into a meat grinder. The soldiers of the security detail, trained in conventional tactics, could only watch in awe as she single-handedly dismantled the enemy attack. During a lull in the fighting, Master Sergeant Gunn, a grizzled combat veteran who had just transferred to Obsidian a week prior, was crouched behind an engine block, reloading. He watched Vance slide into cover beside him, her face a mask of cold focus as she scanned the rocks above. He saw the way she held her weapon, the way her eyes tracked multiple targets at once, the sheer economy of her every movement. It was a deadly dance he had seen only once before a long time ago, in a place he wasn't supposed to be. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Her face was older, harder, but the movements were unmistakable. After the last shot was fired and the eerie silence of the canyon returned, Gunn approached her. He ignored her captain's bars, his voice low and filled with a reverence bordering on fear. "Wraith," he breathed the name. I saw you in Kandahar. The hostage rescue. They said you were a ghost story. A myth." The name hung in the thin desert air, heavy with the weight of black operations and sealed files. Wraith, the call sign of a legendary tier, one operator from a unit that didn't officially exist. An operative who had reportedly been killed in action years ago, her file permanently sealed. The 2 nearest soldiers overheard. Their eyes widened. The quiet logistics captain wasn't just competent. She was a legend. And now, the secret was out. 9. Respect. The return to Firebase Obsidian was quiet. The mission was a resounding success, the asset delivered, and the enemy force decimated with 0 friendly fatalities. But the victory was overshadowed by the revelation that echoed through the base's barracks and chow halls. Captain Vance wasn't just a logistics officer. She was Wraith. The story of her actions in the canyon, embellished with each telling, spread faster than any official report. She was no longer an outsider. She was an enigma, a figure of myth walking among them. For Colonel Marcus Thorne, the news was a profound humiliation. He had not only misjudged her, he had condescended to and belittled a genuine war hero, a soldier whose operational record would make his own chest full of medals look like participation trophies. Her legend now loomed over his command, a silent, constant reminder of his failure of perception. His authority felt hollow, his bluster pathetic. He needed to reassert his dominance, to remind everyone who was in command, not through intellect or strategy, but through the raw, physical power he understood. He found his opportunity during a base-wide formation for supplementary hand-to-hand combat training. 500 soldiers stood in neat rows on the dusty parade ground under the searing sun. Thorne, dressed in fatigues with his sleeves rolled up to reveal thick, muscular arms, was overseeing the drills. His eyes scanned the formation and found her, standing at attention with the other junior officers. "Captain Vance," he bellowed, the parade ground falling silent. Front and center, Alara moved from the ranks, her expression unreadable as she came to a halt before him. "Your file says you're qualified in Level 3 combatives," Thorne said, a predatory smile on his face. "But your primary role is logistics. Let's see what they teach you paper pushers in the real world. A demonstration is in order." He was going to humiliate her. He was going to use his size and strength to put her down physically in front of the entire base, to prove that despite her mysterious past, he was still the alpha, the one in charge. "Assume a defensive stance, Captain," he ordered. Alara didn't move. She stood as she was, relaxed, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. Her posture was a picture of non-aggression. Thorne scoffed, his anger rising at her perceived insolence. "Is that how you defend yourself? Fine. Have it your way," he shouted for the benefit of the assembled soldiers. "The attacker will not always wait for you to be ready. Defend yourself, Captain." He moved with surprising speed, launching a powerful, perfectly executed roundhouse kick. It was not a sparring move. It was a strike meant to shatter ribs, to incapacitate and inflict maximum pain. The collective breath of 500 soldiers was sucked from the air. Alara didn't block. She didn't retreat. As the kick sped toward her, she moved. It was a single, fluid motion, a masterpiece of physics and anatomy. She pivoted on her left foot, turning her body inside the arc of the kick. Her left hand shot out, not to block the blow, but to catch his ankle in an iron grip. Simultaneously, her right hand, fingers rigid, jabbed hard into the bundle of nerves and ligaments behind his knee. His leg, caught at the ankle and struck at the joint, had nowhere to go. She applied a short, sharp twist. The sound was obscene, a wet, percussive crack that echoed across the dead-silent parade ground. It was the sound of a man's bones breaking. Colonel Thorne's roar of aggression turned into a high-pitched scream of agony. His leg buckled, folding at an unnatural angle. He collapsed in a heap on the ground, clutching his shattered limb, his face a mask of shock and blinding pain. Alara stood over him. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, just a cold, quiet finality. She had been tested, and she had answered. The medics scrambled forward, and the base command sergeant major began shouting for order, but no one was listening. All 500 soldiers were staring, in absolute, stunned silence, at the small, quiet logistics captain who had just broken their commander like a twig. 10. Closure. The aftermath was defined by its silence. The official investigation was swift and conclusive. More than 500 witnesses provided identical statements. Colonel Thorne, acting as an instructor, had initiated a full-force, unprovoked attack during a training demonstration. Captain Vance had employed a standard, approved defensive technique to neutralize the threat. The case was closed within 48 hours. The report noted, with clinical precision, that the colonel had suffered a compound fracture of both the tibia and fibula. Thorne was airlifted to a regional medical center for extensive surgery. His command was terminated, his career finished not by an enemy bullet, but by his own arrogance. He left Firebase Obsidian on a stretcher, a quiet, ignominious departure. A week later, a new commander arrived. Brigadier General Hatcher was the opposite of Thorne in every way. He was a small, wiry man with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. He carried himself with an air of quiet professionalism, his reputation for tactical brilliance preceding him. His first act upon taking command was not to address the assembled staff or review the base's operational status. He asked his aide where he could find Captain Vance. He found her where she always was, in the logistics depot, overseeing the loading of a supply convoy. The general walked into the cavernous building, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. The NCOs and privates snapped to attention. Alara turned, her work interrupted, and stood straight. Hatcher walked right up to her, stopping 2 feet away. He didn't speak. He simply looked her in the eye, his gaze holding a deep, unspoken understanding. Then he raised his hand in a slow, perfect salute. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was a sign of profound respect, from one warrior to another. Alara returned it, her own salute just as crisp, just as precise. Not a single word was exchanged. None was needed. The final image of Alara Vance at Firebase Obsidian became a quiet fixture of the base's new rhythm. She stood on the perimeter wall at dusk, a solitary figure watching the desert bleed from orange to purple. Private Jenkins, no longer stammering, approached and handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "Captain," he said. The word was the same, but its weight had changed. It was no longer just a rank. It was a title, earned in chaos and cemented in a moment of shocking violence. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. He left her to her vigil. She took a sip of the hot coffee, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. On the dusty ledge beside her, catching the last crimson rays of the setting sun, sat a single, worn challenge coin. It was no longer hidden. Her past was known, her present was secure, and her value was at last undisputed. The desert was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, so was the war inside her.